Well, thanks for having me. Hey, no PowerPoint today. That's good news. No test or anything like that at the end of it. I was asked to speak on 3 topics. 1, economic recovery in Nevada. 2, are we in a housing bubble and where's real estate? And finally 3, what happened in this legislative session in Carson City and what impact it would have on business. Can you hear me all? I'm too tall. I got to lean into it. There we go. Look at that solution. You're trusting me and I didn't know enough to grab the mic? You should get a refund for the lunch. Okay, economic recovery. I was one of the co-authors on the governor's economic development plan. When Brian Sandoval took office in 2011, he wanted to change the way the state did economic development. And he and the state legislature in 2011 passed legislation and commissioned a report that was done through the summer and fall of 2011 by the Brookings Institution, Brookings Mountain West, which I had, and SRI, which is the old Stanford Research Institute, which has a policy office in Arlington, Virginia. They also, by the way, have a tech office in Menlo Park. They're the ones who invented Siri. That's in iPhones. So they were a good outfit to work with. They know the tech economy well. We came up with the sectors that the state should focus on, starting first and foremost with tourism, which you never want to lose because it would be almost impossible to replace a driver that powerful in the economy, and we have to stay ahead of that and be innovative in that and add capacity like event space and so on. We also came up with a reasonable metric for what would be a targetable number of jobs over the governor's 4-year term, which is 50,000. And based on the month we're in and the number of jobs added, we're ahead of it. It looks like a 60 to 70,000 estimate. And we assume no double dip recession, but slow recovery. And we also did an analysis on where the unemployment came from, of course. And the truth is that so much of the unemployment was construction. You know, the first business of Las Vegas was entertainment, gaming, tourism. The second business of Las Vegas was building Las Vegas. And so the share of the economy that was in construction was much larger than you would expect to find in a comparable region of a couple of million. It was as high as 12 to 13%. So there was, housing, and people were building housing for the people building housing, and so on. So that's what was vulnerable in the recession. In fact, the recession struck in 2 ways at the region that made it really one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in the country in the late part of the last decade. One was that discretionary spending collapsed in the wake of the recession in 2008 and the financial crisis of 2008. And construction went with it. And so 2 drivers, tourism and construction, the 2 anchors, the 2 leading sectors of the region's economy were both impacted. Plus, the region had a lot of people who had speculated on real estate themselves, both commercial and household levels, which I'll talk about when I talk about real estate. And that was problematic as well. So that's how we went into the recession. And what Brookings has done, too, is created a monitor of all Western regional economies. It does a national monitor on this as well that traces each quarter growth and change since the recession. So we're tracking the 100 largest U.S. metros. 10 of these largest U.S. metros are in the West. So it's Boise, Idaho's in there. Ogden, Utah, I think is the smallest one. Ogden or Provo, the smallest ones in the West. Colorado Springs, and so on. Reno's not big enough to get in. Las Vegas is obviously in there. And if you look at the 10 regions in the West, you see that some of them have not recovered the gross metropolitan product of the peak in 07, 08. And we're one of them. In fact, we're the most behind the gross metropolitan product recovery. Phoenix hasn't fully yet, but it's close. Some regions suffered recession, quickly reversed it, and are substantially ahead of their gross metropolitan product. Salt Lake City as a metro economy. In fact, the Wasatch Front from Provo through Salt Lake up to Ogden as a collectivity is about just over 2 million. And it's actually, the federal government now puts it into a common combined statistical area since 2013. So it's in a unified economy because of commuting. That region has had the strongest performance in the recession. Las Vegas and Phoenix have been the most impacted, with Phoenix being slightly better off than Las Vegas. Phoenix has a more diversified economy. Despite its reputation for tourism, Phoenix is actually a pretty large-scale manufacturer. For example, it makes defense items like, you know, Apache attack helicopters, and famously microchips. There's a big microchip plant for Intel in Chandler, Arizona. So, and there's a lot of actually green technology too. There's solar manufacturing. So the city is a more diversified regional economy. It was reliant as well on growth as one of its drivers, but less on discretionary income than us. So it's done a little better. We are in an interesting position because it depends on when you change the base year of how big our economy is. The reality is we grew so fast in the early part of the decade that one could argue the peak point in '07 may have been inflated. And if you go back on a 10-year cycle now, we're larger than we were in the early part of the last decade. So the regional economy is actually ahead of where it was 10 years ago in, say, '03. But it's not ahead of where it was in '07. And in some ways, '07 may not be the most appropriate base year. And there are regional economies that if you take that base year and change it, don't do as well as Las Vegas in that regard. So one of our problems was that what percentage of that growth up into '07 was real, and what part of it was totally speculative, and what part of it is recoverable, and one part of it is not recoverable, and what are the new drivers that substitute for construction. So I said, for instance, that construction was as high as 12%. It's back down to about 5%. Again, without those workers, 90,000, 100,000 jobs lost, we're actually below average in other sectors for unemployment. That's the irony, including we're in pretty good shape in tourism. One of the key areas of potential growth would be healthcare, and here's why. And this was kind of the stunning part of the economic analysis that we did. There is a way of looking at every sector in every region in the United States and asking the question, based on the number of participants in the regional economy, how big should it be and what share of the regional economy should it occupy? So typically healthcare in the US is anywhere from about 15 to 20%, depending on the region. Scale, is it an exporter of medicine? Is it an importer of medicine? Bigger regions tend to have a higher share because they tend to be exporters of medicine. Smaller regions, you know, Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and so on, tend to be below that. What's interesting is we're a region of 2 million people, and predict based on our age, based on healthcare participation, based on wealth, all those numbers, we should have been just about 18% of the regional economy, healthcare. Las Vegas regional economy, healthcare share about 18. It was 12. And it's at about just under 2/3 of the predicted amount. Some of it's just foregone. It's not generated. The biggest share is imported from Southern California. It's the most expensive consumer purchase you can make, most expensive consumer service you can make, and we're importing it. And what that means is it's contracting the region's income and wealth, because it's usually something you do locally. And it would be good to do locally. And so, you know, people talk about, we need to find something new, invent it, corner the market on it, and sell it. I'd start with taking healthcare from 12% and getting it as close to the predicted 18% as you could get, because it's 40,000 jobs direct, another 20 to 30,000 indirect, millions of square feet of office space that are in oversupply in the region, commercial space that are occupied, and so on. And our suggestion was that, and we noticed, Las Vegas is the largest metropolitan area in the US by far, without a medical school. It's not even close. El Paso's getting one. Boise's talking, and we'll likely get one. Orlando got one recently. Austin's getting one. So the rest of the country, the regions that have that, scale, and Phoenix famously got one in the last decade. And were very creative in how they got it. They didn't go on bended knee begging the state. They put together a bond and philanthropy, partnership, and all sorts of creative ways to do it. You don't have to go up to Carson City, which is broke, and beg for a med school. In fact, that's how not to get a med school. The way to, exactly. The way to get a med school is to hustle it up on your own. And you know, the building itself is the high barrier of entry. It's a real estate deal. We might be good at that. Just throwing it out there. So we identified that as a risk because, again, medicine is a kind of volume business. The bigger you are, the more people you see, the more tourism you have, the more opportunity to leverage. We could have a large-scale medical tourist industry on top of our complete satisfaction of local demand for medicine. So there's a lot of reasons of why you'd want to invest institutionally in medicine. And what the Lindsay Institute just did is commissioned a report from the same people who did the one for the Phoenix Medical School, Tripp Umbach, a consulting firm, and they're going to do a return on investment analysis on a med school. How much would the state get by economic stimulus for investment in a med school, for instance? Per dollar in, dollar out. And when, you know, the first thing happens, I get on the phone with these guys, and they're like, we were waiting for your call. I'm like, you were literally waiting for our call? Yes. You're the largest region without one of these things. So we figured you'd call sooner or later because we're 30th ranked as a metro. Every other region in the top 50 has one. The smallest region in the West having one is Reno, by the way. So smaller regions tend to struggle with a med school because you don't have the volume. You don't have the scale and robustness of the clinical practice. In fact, Reno has to borrow Las Vegas's clinical practice at the University Medical Center. But we don't have the other drivers, which are what Phoenix wanted a medical school for wasn't just medical practice itself, but Phoenix did an analysis and realized they're wiped out in biotech, which is an emerging area of great significance in the world economy, the U.S. economy. The U.S. is still a leader in that field. And Phoenix didn't want to be San Diego or the Research Triangle. It just wanted to get in the game. And a lot of the recommendations that Brookings makes is just get in the game. This region is going to be known through our lifetimes and our children's lifetime for tourism. That's what got us to the game. That's what built us to 2 million. It doesn't mean that we have to be inadequate or insufficient in other competitive drivers. We don't have to be the San Diego of healthcare or, you know, of biotech. But we have a biotech equivalent of Flagstaff, Arizona. Could we get it to Tucson in terms of scale? Could we get it to 1 million people in a region scale as opposed to 2 million? Fixing that is most of the work that could be done to consolidate the gains that this region's made over the several decades where it grew from a relatively modest-sized metro to one of the bigger metros in the United States. So it's this kind of systematic, rational, you know, sector by sector. What is the public share of investment? How much would that stimulate in the private sector? What would a medical school do in anchoring, for example, a big share of people who travel to Southern California for medicine in surveys just say, we have no confidence in this region's medicine. We're, in fact, this region's the biggest medical tourists. We have the biggest tourist economy along with Orlando, and then we're the biggest tourists for medicine elsewhere. Orlando had the same problem, and here's what happened. They fixed it. They built a medical school, and they built a whole biotech campus where Governor Bush approved 2 medical schools in one day, one in Miami, one in Orlando. Orlando realized, too, that its retirement sector, which was gaining in the villages, required more serious investment in medicine. So they identified this as a regional driver. They identified it as a deficit. They went to their state government. The state government said, we'll help, but you've got to be creative on your own. They identified resources at Florida State that could be moved and the University of Florida that could be moved to a common medical campus, and all of a sudden, Orlando's in the game. But by the way, they also built themselves a brand new hospitality college. There was a $25 million gift offer, and they matched it. Disney did the theater. Budweiser did beverage. And they're offering one serious, the campus simulates a resort, by the way. It's right next to the convention center, of which they're competitors in. We had a $30 million offer from Harrah's, now Caesars. And the state wouldn't match it. And we are by far the largest economy in the state, and tourism is by far our largest sector. And you wouldn't invest in that. That is amazing to me. Oh, I'm going to do Q&A at the end, but yeah.
Well, if I don't ask it, then I'll forget it.
Yeah, go ahead. Have at it.
The Cleveland Clinic is the big thing that I hear about on television. It sounds like physicians own the clinic. I don't know if they're doing research or not. There were some friends of mine who were very involved in the NDA group. They were trying to bring a research facility up here from Atlanta.
Yes.
Which is one of the research
Yeah.
that you're talking about. Can you?
Sure. Cleveland Clinic, what can we do? The Cleveland Clinic is proof of one thing. Look, we are a place where medicine, high-quality medicine, tourism-based medicine is possible. The Mayo Clinic's in Phoenix, and guess what? They're building their second medical school. ASU's partnering with the Mayo Clinic and building the second medical. Phoenix is onto its second medical school. All right. So, yes, all of this is possible. That's the key point here. Why don't we need Carson City? Because we're Las Vegas. We don't need Carson City. Carson City not only is the smallest U.S. metro at 315th rank, it's declining according to the U.S. Census numbers provided from 2010 to 2012. It is just over 50,000. Our worst 2 years, we added 50,000. We just added 50,000 people. We just added a Carson City, and these are the sleepy years. When we get going again, we're going to add a Carson City a year. And we are a globally connected space where our planes fly over oceans. St. Louis doesn't have planes that fly over oceans. Kansas City doesn't have planes that fly over oceans. Pittsburgh doesn't have planes that fly over oceans. Want me to go down the list? Memphis now doesn't have planes that fly over oceans. We are a well-branded, well-identified, marquee, sellable product, and you can sell it in medicine just as easily. What we need from the state is we need them to leave us alone and let us do this, because we've had to do everything on our own anyway. Who do you think built the Beltway? The state? No. $1.7 billion, all from us. Wasn't that convenient? We're even maintaining most of it. It's not a state road, the Beltway. So we've had to do that. Summerlin Parkway, we built it. The 15 widening, $600 million assessed to the Las Vegas Convention and Visitor Authority, and so on. We've been doing this all along, folks. We'll be fine. Just leave us alone. Let us do what we need to do and get out of our way. And then we'll send you whatever money we've got because we know you need it to run the rest of the state. All right, so there's my rant on that. We could also use, by the way, one of the other drivers identified was there's parts of tourism that aren't fully built out yet. A key sector here is events. Even as the economy tanked, events like the rodeo are resilient because people will save for that. They'll say, all right, I can't go to Vegas for the weekend because I just don't have the money anymore because, you know, one of us lost a job or we've not had a raise in a million years, but we love rodeo. And we're going to save for it and we're going to go to it. So those events have gained as a share. There's, you know, areas where even in terms of ecotourism, we're the base for a lot of Europeans who fly to the U.S. and then travel in the rest of the West, but they spend more money in Las Vegas than they do out in Utah while they're here with us. So there's a lot of other sort of sectors in food and the way we can market ourselves as a sort of food capital of the United States that we're all possible. The state's tourism plan is weird. It says we're a state apart. We were trying to say we were connected. They have us as a state apart, which is interesting because isn't our motto all for country? So which are we? Are we all for country or are we a state apart? You know, I thought some other kooky states were a state apart. You know, there's like these Keep Austin Weird campaigns. You know, we were like, we're running like a Keep Austin Weird campaign for a state. We're not that weird. I don't want to be that weird. I want you to come and visit. Okay, next, the housing bubble or the potential for housing bubble. Where is real estate? In 2011, I used to have this nice PowerPoint slide where I showed that 13 would be the probable recovery year in real estate, and it was based on an analysis of where real estate was, how far it had fallen, what the intrinsic value is, which means what is the land, labor, material inputs into real estate, and what happened is in the bust, we boomed too high, we busted too much. We were too volatile. In the bust, Las Vegas became such a bargain that you could not replicate a house at the value of which it was trading, essentially. And so when you go below intrinsic value, we've seen this in a few regional recessions. In the case of the energy busts in the early 80s and then later on in Denver and Texas and so on, we've seen a couple of tough, the S&L recession in the early 90s. We've seen a couple of regional markets dip like that. And it typically means that, no one's going to destroy the asset for the most part. The asset will remain when there's a recovery. If there's not a double dip, I said, by 13, you would see gains against where the baseline should be, which is this. The safest place to be with housing is when the large share of your median household wealth can buy the median house. And there was a point where we boomed and the median house was over 300 grand. And it went to like 120, 130. Well, that's way below the median household income if you still had a job. And as people recover jobs, and as they seek this housing, and I know we also had changes in the legislation, which were significant, that reduced the amount of inventory coming to market because of the robo-signing scandal. That also played a part in it. But principally, it was about fundamentals. We had institutional investors who've bought most of the houses they're going to buy, and they're not the dominant sale anymore. The dominant sale now is conventional, believe it or not. Somebody who owns a house says, I'd like to sell my house, finds a real estate agent, somebody buys that house. That's most of the transactions now. That's what's different. And what changed is we're now back 170, 180, 180K in housing, in median housing value. If you look at our income, the low to mid twos are the safe spot. So we don't have a bubble because the majority of residents of the region can still purchase with their income the majority of the median-priced houses. And a lot of the boom in prices came from the low end of the market. The high end of the market in Las Vegas, don't even bother looking at regional income. It's a national market. It's an international market. It's Canadians who are rich from oil sand money that hate the winter. And so they're down here with us. And they bought a decent share of luxury housing in the region, if you check with real estate agents. And, a lot of Californians have finally gotten to the point where, yes, they could sell the ranch house in Costa Mesa that costs $1 million and buy their dream house in Las Vegas. So that process is beginning, and the Californians are in our market in earnest again. So we are, could we do it again? Sure. It's a market. Could it go out of whack? Yes, all markets can go out of whack. We're just not there yet because we're not approaching the zone at which a median buyer is priced out of a median house, and that's what we had. And in fact, what we were really doing is that the median buyer could no longer buy the median house, and they were using exotic, highly leveraged financial instruments to get at the median house. So what you were doing is, in the past, instead of a 30-year fixed at a 20% down and a kind of safe zone for a bank to operate within, a lot of even high credit-worthy borrowers were taking highly leveraged, 95% loan to house value because they just didn't have the down payment. They needed that to buy this house. Or they took a teaser rate and so on. So if interest rates remain relatively steady, if employment gains continue their modest pace upward, we could expect appreciation to a point at which you would have a better match between median house values and median income. And that happens over the next couple of years, I'd guess. And so you won't have 30% gains a year. That's catch up. And then after that, it should only grow, if you would hope this would be the case, although we could go into another speculative frenzy. It should only grow relative to the amount of income. The other thing that's volatile in this region is that more adults in this region are from another state than any other state. In fact, there are more California voters in Nevada than Nevada voters in Nevada. Meaning, there are more adults including the governor who was born in Redding, California. There are more California-originated adults in Nevada, especially Las Vegas, who are voter eligible than there are actually people born within the state. And there are, and it's not that close. It's actually like a couple of times bigger. So the reality is that we're an international target and a national target for migration, and the migration's picking up again. And people bring wealth from other regions. And what they can do is they can outcompete a person within this region. A Californian who cashes out a house in central Orange County comes with the kind of equity that can change a dynamic, competing against a person whose wealth comes from tourism may not stand up to that. So the region has a sort of inherent volatility to it, but it also has an inherent attraction to it. And it has an inherent mechanism of recovery to it. And you're seeing that mechanism of recovery. When I said this in 11, I'd say this and I'd see a media account and then I'd see the comment section, and it was just full of very bitter comments about, can't happen fast enough for me, I've lost my house. That's the unfortunate reality of something like that. But it happens for anyone who could hold on. It happens for people who weren't that heavily leveraged. It happens for new buyers who are moving to the region who see, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom, 3-car garage, pool, jacuzzi. The housing's even decently luxurious. It's the largest inventory of discounted luxury housing stock in the U.S. was in both Phoenix and Las Vegas for a time. Phoenix has had the same thing, by the way. Gone right up with us. They're almost tracking dollar for dollar for the same exact dynamic. They're very similar in regard to attraction of especially Easterners. Chicago's a big migratory thread to the East Valley, say, to places like Chandler and Gilbert that buy that housing, that bid up those prices, that sell more expensive houses in the Midwest. All right, finally, what happened in this legislative session? It wasn't that eventful in a legislative session. There wasn't the kind of drama of the 2011 session because 11 was in the heart of the recession. 11 was in the heart of the debate over whether or not you renewed taxation. That was the sunset of taxes, which ultimately got renewed because a ruling came down that you couldn't sweep the pots of money out of places like Clark. When we had a building boom, ahead of the boom, you extract a lot of developer concessions. And in 2010 and 11, Clark was rich with accounts that sat there prime for sweeping. And this is a state, it's called the Dillon Rule state. State runs everything. I was department chair at Virginia Tech in urban planning before this job. And I used to tell the planning students, you work in the local economy, and all the regulation is local for land use, except Nevada. For some reason, Carson City runs our land use. And so, we had all this money, and the state looked at it, and then the Supreme Court said you can't touch things like the water money that was supposed to be for the St. Rose Parkway addition to the M Hotel sued, the Penn Holding, or whoever holds the M sued and won. And so you couldn't sweep that. You had to keep that taxation from what's supposed to sunset in 11 renewed. We renewed it again to 15, by the way. There wasn't even a debate on it this time. And so some of the heat of the tax debate and the waiting and the drama for that were not present this time. Also, you didn't have the housing crisis quite as dramatic. And so that you didn't have to take, in the wake of that robo-signing scandal, where all of a sudden people realized no one actually knew who held the equity, which was parsed up and sold around the world for housing. People didn't know who held title in a lot of cases. The title transferred. So we put a stop to sort of the rapid foreclosure until you could resolve this. And that was a debate in the 11 session. We did some tweaks this time. We changed the rules about selling to families, for example, in a short sale. There's a bunch of little tweaks that went on with that legislation. Not as significant, not inconsequential if you're in that position, but not as significant for the regional economy, because what that other legislation did is dramatically slowed down the inventory entering the market through foreclosure, deeply discounted. So it stabilized house prices in a way. That was part of the dynamic I was looking at in 11, thinking if that went that way, and there's a shadow inventory. Yeah, but it comes in at a higher price point. And a lot of that shadow inventory is battered houses that need 20 or 30 grand worth of investment in plants and in kitchen counters that got stolen and the like. So that takes a while, and you have to enter the market at a price point that warrants the investment in that structure, or it will sit as an undiscovered inventory asset, as they say, in real estate. All right, there were some winners and losers. Winners included Nicolas Cage, who got his tax credits, so our film industry friends are happy. A loser would be mining, who now face the voters in 14. The voters can have the decision to remove mining special privilege from the state constitution, and given the percentage of residents in this state, we're at 73% of the state's population in Clark. My guess is it'll get taken off the state constitution. The real change is that Southern Republicans, like Mike Roberson, have no stake in mining. So instead of taxing something that's local, that is in the Las Vegas regional economy, why not go over here and find this mining industry? They look prime for putting more money in. Mining puts less into the state government than live entertainment. Nicolas Cage and his friends. You know, Penn and Teller is more important to the state than mining. And mining's not all that important to the state in another way. It ain't like we're doing a lot with mining after stripping the stuff out of the ground and squeezing it into some ugly-looking ingot and sending it over to Salt Lake City where it's refined to its pure form, and where all the managements in Denver and Salt Lake and Toronto and Vancouver and every other city in every other state but here. If mining wanted to solve its problems, a good strategy would be go in Mike Roberson's district, take some of the people who do things like discovery services or environmental services. If you're a specialist in Nevada environmental law, regulation, you got a job in Salt Lake, literally. Put some of that here in Roberson's district, and then he'd have a stake in it, but they haven't done that. They figured that the Northerners ran the state. They figured wrong, and they'll find out what that means. And then you need a 2/3 vote, so let's say mining loses the status, step one. Then to raise it, you need a 2/3 vote. Is that possible? Less probable, but not impossible, especially when 3/4 of the state lives in the South and has no stake in mining. So we're out of the mining industry. This is what I do. Why don't you move some assets here? And I don't mean the stuff that scrapes things out of the ground up in, Cortez Hill. I mean some of the corporate services that are in Salt Lake, because the people in Salt Lake can't do anything for you. They can't protect you from taxes because it's in another state. All the gold bars and the silver bars that come back for our sesquicentennial, product of Salt Lake City. That's embarrassing. And so we're going to need, forget the smelter, we're going to need some of the corporate services, and we're going to need it along our 215. They're going to have to help us pay for that road. The other thing is that there was a bump in some of the incentives given to the Governor's Office of Economic Development. They had to go into the special session and provide some of that. Oops, that got left out. And then there's a change in the fuel tax here and the school tax potential up north, and the fuel tax here is significant for us in that we are able to now index the fuel taxes against inflation, which should add a few pennies more and would provide extra supplemental road money for local projects. We also got lucky. We got one extra person helping us govern the roads from Clark County. See, what it used to be is 7 people, 4 elected officials, and this is the only state where the governor is directly running the roads. No kidding. Every other state, it's separate. And the governor is the head of NDOT, literally the board director. And that was not the intention of the Wilson administration in 1916 when they sent this out to the states and they were worried about politicians, Tammany Hall style New York, 19th century gangs in New York type guys taking this over. So we in 1957 switched it to where there's the governor, lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and the controller, and then 3 districts: Elko, Reno, Las Vegas. That sounds fair. And 3 members appointed. So we had 1 vote for our 2 million residents, and the North had a vote for every 375,000 residents. So we had approximately 1/6 the power per person on transportation decisions. That's why there's a beltway going in around Carson City. Not the Galena Bridge that everybody knows about and is famous. They're literally building a beltway around Carson City. I'm not making that up. It's under construction. It's a $187 million beltway around Carson City, and it's under construction. It's a city with 50,000 people and declining, and they're building a beltway around it. Meanwhile, they're like, that I-11 thing, man, you might have to put a toll on that. Toll on it. That means that a Phoenix resident coming here would pay 2 tolls. First toll's out on the road. Second toll is when they check into a hotel, and they have to pay the bed tax, the room tax, which includes a $600 million assessment to the Las Vegas Convention and Visitor Authority, which means they're paying it there, and they're paying it on the road. We all pay tolls. All our roads are tolled. Everyone who lives around the 215, how many of you live and have special improvement district taxes in this room? Does anyone pay a SID in this room? If you look at it, a few hands went up. Yeah, you are. Thank you for the regional infrastructure. I appreciate it. I appreciate your efforts. So you're paying a tax. You're not throwing a nickel into a machine somewhere, but you're paying it in a quarterly payment or a yearly payment. So we got to change. We got 1 more. We proposed 11 board members appointed on their expert knowledge, representing the region's population, 1 for every 250,000. So Senator Menendo proposed that. And that would have been 8 us, 2 Reno, 1 Elko. Instead, we got 1 more board member. So we now have a vote. This is our new vote. We have a vote for every 1 million people. So we went from counting as 1/6 a Northern Nevadan to 1/3. So we're making progress. We'll be back. We'll be back on that. And finally, Southern Nevada as a coalition, and the Hispanic coalition separately, which is dominant in Southern Nevada, went to this legislature and got more out of it than we typically did. We got, for example, English language learning funded not to the $8 million or the $20 million as proposed, but $50 million, which is a down payment. Lindsay Institute did the analysis on this. Every other state's doing this. They fund it fully in Arizona. You know, they pass 1070 in Arizona and then pay for people to, you ready? Learn English as fast as possible. Yeah. So we were like, you're on your own on that, but, you know, good luck. Now we're paying for part of that at least. The other thing is in higher ed, we got a lot more money than the northern people who were running the whole system wanted to give us, which worked out pretty nicely. And in the future, there's a much greater certainty and identity with this region and its interests because the Chamber of Commerce is being quite concrete and quite specific about what deliverables it needs going forward. So 15 should shape up to be even better. And with that, I'll take questions. Thank you. Well, one way to do that, and by the way, this was a debate in Alaska as well. Actually, Sarah Palin refused to actually go to the State House, to the governor's mansion in Juneau, Alaska. She had a busy life, busy family, and she said, I want to do it out of Anchorage. And Anchorage is where most Alaskans live. So that made sense. What we could do is this. We could switch to, where only 3 states don't have yearly sessions. Most states are part-time legislatures, but they meet yearly. And most big states meet more time than we do. We only have 120 days, you know, every other year. Now, a lot of people say, good for that. I can't stand those guys. That's too long. Could you cut it to 60? One of our problems is this. If we weren't a Dillon rule state, we could do that, meaning the state does things like this. Most states, you know, there was a debate on should the county commissioners directly run the University Medical Center, or should they appoint a board to run the University Medical Center? Now, here's how it goes in most states. That's a county decision. You make the call. So they voted. They said, yeah, we want to set up a board, but they had to go up to Carson City to get that resolved, to get that confirmed. It was tabled. We're only allowed 4 bill drafts per big city down here per session, because this is what they say. Don't do your business, we'll do it, we're a Dillon rule state. Then you get up there and they say, we ran out of time, we can't do your business. But don't you do your business. And most of what's happening in America is that, and Bruce Katz, who's at the Brookings Institution speaking at the U.S. Conference of Mayors on Monday on this topic, and a book he just wrote on metropolitan America, most metropolitan areas are ignoring their state capitals, and the federal government is useless. They are instead just gaining whatever tools they need, partnering with business, and getting stuff done. The problem is, we don't have these tools. Carson actually holds these tools. So we either have to do this. Either Carson has to let us do a lot more of our own business, or it has to do more business. If it does more business, the suggestion would be every other year it meets in Las Vegas. But we don't say Las Vegas. We say this. The best thing to produce more efficiency in government would be to meet on the off year in closest proximity to the majority of legislators. In a government facility that's most appropriate and proximate to the center point of those legislators. That would be Grant Sawyer, which you could modify easily. We don't have big chambers. We only have 21 in the Senate and 42 in the Assembly. This is like, we could make it, this room could be a legislature, all right? It's like the Continental Congress. So you don't need that much space. It's not a big lift. And every other year, you come down, and then people are like, but that would be moving the capital from Carson City. It already got moved to Reno. How do I know? Did you know that gaming is smaller than government in Reno as a share of the regional economy? Let me repeat that. RG, gaming, is much bigger than the other G, government. Gaming, government, Las Vegas. Gaming is smaller than government in Reno. I work for NSHE. they're not in Carson City. They're on the UNR campus, okay? So, I mean, I used to work for the Virginia system. That was legitimately in Richmond. It wasn't, my rival school was the University of Virginia. It wasn't in Charlottesville, So here, though, Reno already has the government. So I think, if we ever get that sticky moment where they say, but Carson City is good and pure and true, and we should never do it anywhere else. Say, Reno, it's already in Reno. If it's in Reno, why isn't it in Las Vegas? Isn't it more efficient to put it down here where most people live? And you don't need it all. You can just split it. Every other year it's here. We replicate a lot of these functions anyway because of the scale of the population down here. So that's a reasonable ask. Next question. One more? One more question.
What are the odds of that happening?
When you're at 73% of the legislature, not bad, but here's what happens. Do you remember something called Stockholm Syndrome with Patty? Does anyone remember Patty Hearst? I remember as a kid when Patty Hearst, I was a teenager. I was in high school. I'm dating myself. I was in high school when Patty Hearst got kidnapped, and I was vaguely watching the news. I was more worried about girls and pimple cream, but I was watching the news. I was watching a little bit of the news. And I remember Patty Hearst gets kidnapped, and it looks like a straightforward kidnapping of this heiress of the Hearst fortune and so on. Then, like a month or two later, Patty Hearst has a gun, and she's named Tanya, and she's knocking over a bank with the Sudanese Liberation Army. And the experts come on television and say, well, actually, well, it's called Stockholm Syndrome, first identified in a bank vault in Stockholm where people identify with their captors. And so Hearst suddenly became, hey, I get it. I get your gripe. I'm going to be part of the Sudanese Liberation Army. Give me a gun. I'm Tanya. She didn't go to jail because that was her defense. That when they caught the whole Sudanese Liberation Army, as that sort of stuff usually happens, you end up getting caught. And they got hold of Patty Hearst, and the lawyer was F. Lee Bailey. And F. Lee Bailey's like, oh yeah, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to run this one. You hear the Stockholm Syndrome? They were saying it all over the news already. It's probably poisoned every jury. So he went in, he won. Great, good to have a good lawyer. Well, we have a version of that, which is the state capitol's up there, and then you go up and they start talking about the trees or something. They always tell me we have no trees down here. I don't know what this means, by the way. They have scrub oaks. I used to have actual white oaks in my backyard that could slice my house in half. And I'm glad to get away from those trees in old Virginia. I lived in Alexandria, Virginia for a lot of years. The trees could cut my house. Some poor lady died down the street in a storm. The tree reached in the house and killed her. I'm afraid of trees. My son is traumatized. Every time it rains, he thinks the electric's going to go out. He's glad to be here. So they're all, we don't have trees down there, You don't have any trees in the South. We got trees. You got little scrub oaks. What are these trees? Well, there's this kind of cult of the North, and they're like, well, we're really the responsible people at the state. You've got this real party and industry we're not really certain about. We don't, not a lot of serious people. Not a lot of serious people down in Las Vegas. When we mentioned a medical school, the leadership in the North actually said, a medical school in Las Vegas? Really? Would you imagine that somebody would want to go from medicine? Let me get this right. Medicine in Las Vegas. I'm like, you realize there's an osteopathic college that already produces double the amount of graduates in 4 years than the state medical school, right? You do know that your medical school in Reno produces less than half the graduates of the University of Vermont, a state that is smaller than the city of Las Vegas, right? So yeah, a medical school in Las Vegas. And no, it's not funny, because never conflate the frivolous nature of our industry for the deadly serious competence that we have in business. My evidence for that? We're a gigantic import economy. All those people that come here from abroad? They bring their currency, and they translate it into US dollars. And not only that, did you know that we hold big holdings abroad? How much does the, MGM's in this game now too. How much does the Sands Corporation hold in China, in Singapore? Well, that money is repatriated to the United States, and that repatriation of cash scores in the current accounts as a import of that cash to the U.S., as an export, a service export of the United States. What's Reno exporting? Thank you.